Hey there, good evening. Nice to see you. It's time for the Bronx Buzz. This is BronxNet's program where we talk to writers and editors and journalists and all different people who are putting stuff out in the Bronx. In our second segment, we're going to focus on this book, which is just an incredible volume about our home borough. It is the third edition of South Bronx Rising. But in our first segment, we're thrilled to bring back a staff reporter from the Bronx Times. It is our buddy Aliya Schneider. Nice to have you with us, Aliya.
Thanks for having me, Gary.
Aliya, you have written extensively about the Bruckner rezoning plan, and I have gotten a lot of information, frankly, on what's going on through you, and we appreciate that. Where is this at right now? Why don't you bring us up to date?
Well, the project is pretty much good to go now. I mean, in terms of the zoning process, the city has given developers the go ahead. The city council unanimously approved the zoning amendment after city councilwoman Marjorie Velasquez completely changed at least her public stance on the project and urged her fellow council members to pass it. The mayor had a chance to veto the project, but he didn't, which was not a surprise because he was a vocal supporter of the project. So
And all rezonings, I might add. I mean, rezoning is his thing. He's made that clear.
yeah, so they have the zoning permissions that they need to go forward.
Mhm. It was a surprise to you, frankly, to me, and certainly to our constituents, that the council member changed her position. Do we have any indication of why, or what was it that changed her opinion? That something maybe that she was happier about that she wasn't happy before, that was part of the project? I mean, do we know why there was really a 180-degree shift?
So in her interviews and public statements for quite a while in terms of why she was against the project, she never really made it about something specific that she wanted from them. It was mostly the fact that she was against it. And I had asked her, is there anything about this project that if is there anything that the developers could do to get your support? And she basically doubled down that she was against it. So, in terms of leading up to her changing her mind, there wasn't like one clear thing that she was asking for. She was concerned that the carpenters union was not involved and they ultimately were involved. So, I'm sure that's part of it. In her statement that day, she talked about deeper affordability. They did lower the area median income for some of the units, but she also cited points that advocates for the project have been making for months and months that she didn't, at least publicly, entertain much. So it's a bit of a mystery in terms of when exactly she changed her view and what exactly it was.
Or why? Yeah.
Yeah, and I have been trying to get her on the phone to have a deeper conversation beyond the statement that she put out, and she has not made herself available for an interview. I really hope to talk to her more about this because it was a big change and I am still trying, so hopefully she decides.
Hopefully she will. I will tell you also, just between us journalists and all the people watching, we have invited her to Bronx Talk to review that and other issues as well. And they haven't fully confirmed an appointment. We hope that she will. Her constituents on that alone are raising red flags and saying, well, wait a minute, you told us one thing and then you went and did another. That's a difficult thing. But if she can justify it and explain why that this she would support a project, I mean, we'll see. Now, to your knowledge, this is now ready to go. The mayor has approval or had approval. Like where is that at
The mayor could have vetoed it and he did not, meaning that is impossible.
in the proper time frame?
Yep, so
So it's moving forward.
good to go.
Uh, Wow, it is a go, and we'll see, of course, if there are ongoing protests about it. If there are, there's a lot of opposition to it. Whether people, I think you had told me in a previous discussion that there was some suggestion of lawsuits. It's hard to say that that can work because the process has moved forward apparently appropriately, even if people don't like it. I wonder if there will be protests when trucks start moving in. Who knows? So that's where that is at. Do you see the Just Home project, which is the Fortune Society going to occupy a vacant building on the Jacoby Hospital campus? Do you see that as a similar kind of project because there's been similar dissatisfaction about it as the Bruckner rezoning? How do you see that Just Home project, which you have written about extensively?
Yeah, I mean, the proposals are very different projects and they're in two different neighborhoods, but they're both in the same city council district and they're both facing a similar kind of anger in response. I think there's trust issues that are coming up in terms of constituents questioning very early on, is this a done deal? Is it going to actually matter what we say? People were skeptical of Councilmember Velasquez's stance against Bruckner when she was saying time and time again that she was against it. And they kind of questioned whether she actually was against it. And then
Right.
at the end, she supported it.
So
So
now there would be, I think there would be a legitimate question mark as to whether that is going to happen here. Now, the article that we just showed, you wrote about we actually did a show on it on Bronx Talk as well. There was it wasn't quite violent, but there was a very vehement, vile in many cases, hearing at Jacoby Medical Center about this process. You were in the room? What was it like being in that room? Scary, I thought.
it can be overwhelming being in that environment. I'm just trying to take it all in, make sure I'm taking my notes, but also getting some photo
Fair
and
enough.
video. Um, I wasn't surprised that it was chaotic because there was a Morris Park Community Association meeting over the summer. And similarly, it had a lot of people who were very upset about the project. There were representatives of the project there and elected officials there. So even though it wasn't, like official city business, it kind of had the appearance of a city public hearing. And people were very upset. They didn't want to hear from anyone who supported the project. They didn't want to hear people ask questions about the project. I covered that and took videos of that as well. And I think that kind of set the stage for the atmosphere of the community board hearing. I think it's a little different because the community board has certain rules in terms of how people are supposed to behave. I'm not aware of if the community association has rules, but the community board, they have certain rules that are supposed to be enforced.
It did not appear that at that meeting at Jacoby Medical Center that anything was enforced. I mean, people were threatening each other. There was one video I saw of somebody coming up to somebody and saying, "Where do you live? I want to bring you a present." I mean, and then use the F word after that. I mean, that kind of attitude. I mean, to be honest with you, for me, it smacked of the January 6th insurrection. That people just said, "We're going to be right. We're going to take over," and bully people into our point of view. That is not I've said it on the air and on Bronx Talk. That is not what we need in the Bronx, and not what we need at a public hearing. I mean, it'd be hard to disagree with that.
The community board attempted to moderate. It wasn't very consistently enforced, which I think was part of the issue. So I think when people were told that they have to be quiet, maybe they weren't taking it as seriously. At the end of
Mm.
the day, it was very rowdy, and there were definitely people breaking the rules of etiquette. Um,
To
but
say the least, yeah.
but yeah, no one was kicked out of the meeting, and so that kind of validates the behavior. When one woman was speaking to people, paraded a "Don't Tread on Me" flag.
Yeah, I saw that. I couldn't believe that. I mean, that is not appropriate. Um, at most hearings or meetings of this sort, you get a certain amount of time. I think usually it's 3 minutes to speak, and then at that point the microphones are turned off, and most people abide by those regulations because that's fair and that's the way. But in this case, as I understand, there was one guy making a point. He was not happy with the Fortune Society, and they let him go for 20 minutes. I saw the video. I was like, wait a minute, this is not an appropriate hearing. The borough president came out and said that she was going to take some interest in this. I wonder if there will be some action, or whether it be changing of community board members, or who knows. But we really can't have this tenor of dialogue in the Bronx. I mean, that's the way I see it. What do you know what the timing is on that, on approval for that? Is that a city council thing as well, that it'll have to go before the city council?
Yeah, that has to go to the city council. When I asked about the timeline for that, I was told it hasn't been set yet. The community board is voting on that this week, which is an advisory vote, just like with Bruckner. The community board voted against it, but at the end it still went through because it's advisory. The leadership committee voted to reject the Just Home proposal already with the community board. And so we'll find out later this week if the full board is going to go against that. And
We should mention, by the way, we didn't mention it's Community Board 11, and the
yes,
Bruckner proposal is Community Board 10, just so people would be informed about that. We're just about out of time. You working on anything of interest that we should know about?
well, the election's coming up.
Oh, the election's coming up. That's fair enough. All
Yes,
right.
reporters
Uh,
on those.
Mhm. And it will be interesting, especially in that part of the Bronx, because I think the opposing candidates have more followers than they do in other parts of the Bronx, given the nature of the Republican Democratic split geographically. Well, listen, Aliya Schneider, we greatly value your work. We greatly value what you do for the Bronx Times. We really appreciate that you come on with us to discuss some of these issues. And we certainly will look forward to having you join us again in the future.
Thanks for having me.
Great. All right. We are going to take a short break. And when we come back, as I mentioned, we are going to be taking a look at interviewing the author of this particular book, and also taking a look at this book, South Bronx Rising, third edition, which brings you right up to date to the present time. And that's what we'll do when we come back.
We built a media network for you.
BronxNet TV,
Come learn in your new state-of-the-art studios at Lehman College.
at Mercy College.
And coming soon to the South Bronx in the Hub.
Inspire with your stories, culture, history.
Your Bronx on BronxNet.
Engage with us.
Connect with us at your channels and at bronxnet.tv.
Learn, engage, inspire. BronxNet TV,
From the Bronx,
To the world.
BronxNet.
All righty, welcome back to the Bronx Buzz. I am thrilled about this segment, and I'll tell you why, because I am thrilled about this book. This is the third edition of South Bronx Rising, and it is just incredibly well done. As you can see, it is a scholarly work, and so it is my pleasure to welcome the author, Jill Jonnes. Nice to have you with us, Jill.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Jill, just a little background about you. You know, when you and I talked prior to the program, I just assumed you were like a lifelong Bronxite like me, and we're like, oh, somebody's got to document what's been going on. But that's not really the case with you, is it?
No, so I grew up overseas, and I first came to the Bronx when I was a graduate student at Columbia Journalism School in 1977, a long time ago. And we did an entire semester just trying to learn what was going on in the Bronx. And that was everything from meeting Raymond Rueda and people who were squatting, but also involved in a lot of constructive activities, all the way up to people at City Hall and the Ford Foundation. And the Bronx was in really bad shape in those days. The fires were moving along. And then I went on, I was working as a journalist at the Bergen Record. And then I came back to New York and started freelancing and began doing a lot of real estate coverage. And it was a story about the rehabilitation of Roosevelt Gardens on the Grand Concourse that got me back in the Bronx.
And so you were inspired by, I'll tell you what always inspires me. You also mentioned A Decade of Fire, the wonderful film that documents that era, that people said, okay, they're not going to do it. We're going to do it ourselves. And so certainly at that time, the story was the people of the Bronx taking control of their own communities, unlike many other places in the world. So why don't you articulate for us the three editions and how we arrived at the third edition, which is here now. So what years did numero uno and numero dos cover? And then let's bring it up to the present.
Yeah. So the first book starts with the Indians and Jonnes Bronx. So back, and as you see, it had
even
a different
before
title.
1977.
It came out in 1986.
Right.
And at the end of that book, so it tells the whole story of, the whole history of the Bronx, but with the bulk of the focus, like half the book, really looking at what had happened, in the last sort of previous decades. And it ends with Ed Logue standing in front of the first Charlotte Street houses with the white picket fences, which was his huge accomplishment, because contrary to all the sort of urban know-it-alls who said no one in their right mind would want to come and buy a house and live in the Bronx. Many people wanted to do that.
I'm right with you here.
So that was the end of what turned out to be the first edition. Who knew? So quite a few years later, around 2000, someone from Fordham University got in touch with me and said, it'd be great if you came back and updated this, because the Bronx has all been rebuilt.
We're still alive and things are going on. Yeah. So then you did the second edition.
That was the second edition. Brought you, and it's just further chapters. And I do have to say, when I came back to the Bronx, oh my God, it was, because I had moved to Baltimore. I had not set foot in the Bronx in 14 years. It was so moving to see what had happened. And honestly,
because of what you had seen.
Right. When I left, the place was not rebuilt.
Right.
I mean, it was being rebuilt, and the groups that would rebuild it were there. They're very much in my book. I knew them all. It was so moving to come back.
And to me, while as I said, gee, it would have been nice if you were kind of a Sabra Bronxite and you had been here. But the perspective of somebody from the outside, I mean, we talk about these things all the time. And that perspective is incredibly worthwhile. I should mention that I remember years ago with the Columbia School of Journalism, I used to sit in a bus with those students, and they would tour the Bronx, and we would, and they would have the same visceral reactions that you had, like, wait a minute, what is this? What was this? And what is it going to become? Right. So now you've done the two versions. I don't want to spend any more time on those, because I want to get to this one, Numero Tres, South Bronx Rising. What years does that cover? And then let's break down what's in there.
Okay,
because
so
some of it is just incredibly well documented.
So the second edition ended basically in 2000. So we're now 2002. So we're now 20 years later. 5 years ago, I get an email from a reader who says, I've read your book. I really love it. But, a lot's going on here and you should really come back and update this. And I should say that since I wrote what then was called We're Still Here, I've written another 5 books. And I in no way was thinking about coming back and updating this book.
What, that again? Right.
Well, no, it wasn't at all on my mind. But actually, my in-laws were living in the Bronx, and
Of
I was coming up
course.
to see them.
All right.
And so I thought, well, I will reconnect with the people I know. And then there's a lot of new people. And the story this time was very different because the South Bronx, the Bronx has been rebuilt. The rebuilding has continued. So the story this time is much more about the rise and expansion and creation of new cultural and artistic institutions.
Mhm.
And also, I had no idea that the Bronx River for the last 50 years was being slowly restored to the point that,
Mhm.
you now have this beautiful place with parks along it. Someone said to me, what was the most shocking thing to you when you came back to the Bronx this time?
And was it the Bronx River?
It was the Bronx River because it's so not what you expect. You don't expect to come to the Bronx to find a beautiful river, the only river in New York
Yes,
City.
the river from which we are named, of course.
Yes.
And
Yes, for Jonnes Brock.
the other thing or another of the many things, and I must say, congratulations, because it's exhaustively researched and indexed and footnoted. I mean, that is not often done. A lot of people pass over our borough, but you have really gone to town, so to speak, with this. There are threats, and you have acknowledged those threats of, for example, gentrification in the South Bronx, and you have again talked about all those kinds of things. Let me ask you this, just kind of your impression, and again from somebody from the outside: are you hopeful or hopeless? Because there are people very concerned, for very good reasons, about what's going on down there. That all you got to do is drive down the Deegan, and you see all the new buildings, and those are generally not being built for Bronx people, but for people to live a little cheaper than on the Upper East Side. So, are you hopeful or hopeless after going through all that? About the 4th edition is going to show, not that I'm pushing, the 4th edition is going to show more progress or show how people who were really dedicated got hurt.
I am by nature an optimist, and I think
Okay.
that if you want to put things in context, the Bronx, if it were just a city, would be the 7th largest city in America, and I don't know any other comparable city that lost as much housing and as much population that so totally rebuilt itself. And according to the last census, there are more people living in the Bronx now than were in 2020. So the Bronx is fully recovered. I also think that the changes in the rent laws that happened just before COVID arrived, and I should say I ended up writing a COVID afterwards. So the book
Mhm.
starts, with Jonnes Bronx and comes up through COVID. I think that the rent laws have removed a lot of the impetus for gentrification and pushing people out. I don't want to get too technical, but there's no
Right.
preferential rents left anymore. And so the incentives for all this sort of predatory private equity and pushing people out, I think have ended. In terms of the sorts of luxury housing that's being built, I mean, it is on what someone has referred to as the Golden Crescent. So it's really along the Harlem River. I mean, we don't know how that's all
Oh,
going to
okay.
play
I'm
out.
I'm getting that hesitation. You're just
Yeah.
not sure. I'll tell you the thing that inspires me over the last 20 years, and obviously, I mean, Bronx Talk, my other program, is 28 years old, so I've been sitting in this seat or that seat for all that time. The human capital
Yeah.
here is incredibly fertile, and maybe more so. And the other thing that I would mention, because I know a lot about it, is media in the Bronx. And I tell this story all the time. If you've got 1.4 million people here, the city of Boston has 600,000 people, but they have network television, they have daily newspapers. I think a parallel or an analysis of the development of the Bronx and the state of Bronx media, the infusion of BronxNet television, being able to highlight some things. I think some of that has had real effect in the emergence of News 12 and many other things, has had real effect on the development. Plus, the fact that we don't have a lot of media is also one of the problems. So anyway, that's Gary's editorial on and maybe that's for the fourth edition. I don't know. I know you're doing this won't air in time to promote all the events and things that you're doing. How do you find that people of the Bronx respond to this? Are they happy with it? I mean, I see things like, I said, wow, did she write about the Kingsbridge Armory? Oh, yes, she did. Did she write about Bankside? Oh, yes, she did. Did she, and all these things. I mean, what are people of the Bronx telling you?
Well, many people have actually read the book already because I was sending them advance copies, and it's been out for a couple of weeks now. I have gotten nothing but positive response, and so many people are so involved and committed at so many levels.
That was the human capital that I was referring to.
Right.
Yes.
And so the person who wrote the foreword is Nilka Martell.
Right.
And she, I think at this
She
point,
should write a book herself.
Yes. Yes. And I met her through reporting on the restoration of the Bronx River, but she also gave me a fantastic history tour of the very sort of colonial old Bronx.
Jill, we're almost out of time.
Okay.
I want to congratulate you on the book. I want to urge all my friends and neighbors in the Bronx to pick it up, to read it, because it does two things. One, it's a mirror, and you will recognize all the people and all the things that you have known about and that you have loved and that make you love to be a Bronxite. On the other hand, it will fill in all the blanks of why things happened, how things happened, and the challenging questions like I asked, what's next? Who knows? So congratulations. That's all I want to say. And thank you.
And thank you.
You are welcome here every time, because these are the things we need to keep us going, to keep us fertile,
right. Well,
to keep us
I'm
imagining.
hoping to be back for Bronx Week.
All right. Well, we'll look for you then, and we'll bring you back at that time.
Okay.
Jill Jones, the book again, South Bronx Rising. I was just talking with my producer, Anderson. We're going to find a place up here for it, because many of the books that you refer to in here, like Carolyn McLaughlin's book, are all written about in here.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jill.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Great. We'll see you next week. We got to run. We've got a busy
Onward
show.
to the next thing.
Onward. Good night. We'll see you next week.